Thanks for watching the Daily Debate live Thursdays here on Nile TV International. I'm Tagreed Hussein, and I have the pleasure of your company for the coming hour. We'll be talking more about the results of the important summit that has been held, the Arab South American countries bi-regional fourth summit that was hosted in Riyadh under the chairmanship of the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman, and attended by delegations of Arab and South American countries. A very important address by King Salman that stressed on developing economic relations between the Arab and South American countries, promising to achieve development and prosperity to overcome all the obstacles and constraints. The summit ended in emphasizing the mutual understanding to bolster regional ties and advocating the right of the people to live in a stable condition, hoping for a prosperous future with no dangers of terrorism, nuclear weapons, and weapons of mass destruction. Earlier in the day on Thursday, Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry stressed that opening the door for legitimate migration is one of the main solutions to the migrants' crisis in Europe. In his speech before the EU-Africa Summit in Malta, which he delivered on behalf of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the Foreign Minister had pointed out to the important link between migration and development. So Shoukry called on easing the visa procedures and allowing the freedom of movement. The issue of migration has been also on top of the list. The top diplomat had called on EU countries to take part in sustainable development in African countries and also opening the door for employment of the African workers. While stressing more about, we find the common factor is Africa and the whole world directed to Africa, whether through relations, through investments, so eyes are on Africa. With me, a very distinctive panel to discuss the headline, to discuss more about the Riyadh Declaration and more. I have with me Mr. Yahya Negm, former diplomat. Thank you so much, Mr. Negm, for being here.
Thank you. Always my bridge.
And always have the pleasure also to have with us Professor Dr. Ahmed Mahanna, Professor of Political Economy. Dr. Mahanna, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Well, we will be discussing further more about the Arab Latin America Summit, the recommendations, why opening horizons now in that sphere, and definitely also the main important points that came in the Riyadh Declaration and more on the Daily Debate tonight. Join us for more after this report. Will be back.
Arab and South American leaders found common ground in support for the Palestinians during their summit on Wednesday, aimed at strengthening ties between the two regions. Venezuela's president and Saudi Arabia's monarch specifically mentioned the Palestinian cause in their public remarks. The summit's final statement also called for the creation of a Palestinian state in all of the West Bank and Gaza, with its capital in Jerusalem. Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro has followed in the footsteps of his predecessor Hugo Chavez by championing Palestinian statehood as part of a broader battle against perceived Western imperialism. Saudi King Salman opened the two-day summit by commending Latin American countries for their foreign policy stances, particularly with regard to the Palestinians. The closing communique of the Fourth Arab South American Summit called on Iran on Wednesday to respond to the United Arab Emirates' request for a peaceful resolution of a dispute over the three Emirati islands under Iranian occupation since 1971. The summit's final statement affirmed the need for a peaceful solution to the Syrian crisis, one that preserves the unity and territorial integrity of the country and fulfill the aspiration of its people. The Arabian Sea islands of the Greater Tanub, Lesser Tanub, and Abu Musa have long been a source of tension between Iran and Gulf states. It also called for a solution to the impasse in Yemen, where a Saudi-led coalition allied with the internationally recognized government is battling Shiite Houthi rebels supported by Riyadh's regional rival Iran. The closing statement also highlighted the importance of the implementation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2216. The statement also stressed on the support of the ongoing political in Libya in form of dialogue under the auspices of the United Nations. Additionally, participants expressed their rejection of any interference in the internal affairs of any country in the region, as it would constitute a violation of the Charter of the UN and the principles of good neighborhood. Representatives and leaders also stressed on the importance of respecting the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of the countries, as well as the peaceful settlement of disputes. The closing remarks stressed that investment is one of the pillars of social and economic development in the region, and it also called for the promotion of trade and investment between the Arab and South American countries. The statement welcomed the establishment of an international center to combat terrorism and has the full support of Saudi Arabia.
Mr. Nigm, why Latin American nations, meantime, in this sense of partnership with the Arabs?
Well, we have a great importance of the common relations between Latin America and the Arab world. First of all, historically, we have common background and common legacy between the two regions. Through Spain and Al-Andalus, Andalusia, was the common background for these two cultures to mix up. Arabs stayed there for almost 8th century. And then, actually, when the Arab domination in Spain has reached a final, they started to discover the New World and to discover Latin America as a whole. So many as well, the history tells us that many of the Arabs who lived there in Spain and Andalus left for Latin America. Because they were afraid of the persecution, Catholic persecution in Spain, which they call the Reconquista. And they left for Latin America to find freedom, to find new place to live, because they persecuted them, persecuted their religion, because persecuted their existence in Spain. So they took advantage of the new world and immigrated to Latin America, in Venezuela, Brazil, the Caribbean countries, Argentina as well. So we have a very solid background. We see much resemblance in the customs of the people there, the way they talk, the way they express themselves, the way they laugh. Much resemblance to the Arabs in their ways of living. So also Latin America saw a wave of immigration also from Africa. African immigrants, they took them as slaves in first grade, and then after this, with the liberation of these Latin American countries, they became normal individuals. They have also big minorities in these Latin American countries. So we have such historical and geographical backgrounds with Latin Americans. Of course, also we have a very interesting resemblance in the recent history. We had two great leaders in the 19th century, Muhammad Ali in Egypt about 1805, and Simón Bolívar in Latin America in the same period, almost, and they were very great leaders. They liberated their countries, they united their regions. Muhammad Ali did a lot of work here in the Arab region to unite Egypt and then to create a great Arab states, and then Simón Bolívar there did the same. He liberated his country and the neighboring countries from the Spanish domination and occupation, and then he tried to make a unity or a union between the Latin American countries, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Panama, Peru, Bolivia. And Bolivia was named after Simón Bolívar, the great liberator in in Latin America. So we have a lot of resemblance in the past, in the present, and the future. Also, they suffered from the external intervention, especially American intervention in the last 2 centuries, in the 19th and 20th century. Something like this happened here in the Middle East. We had Sykes-Picot Convention in the beginning of the 20th century. They had the Monroe Doctrine in the 19th century in Latin America, which considers Latin America as the background or the backdoor for United States of America. United States rejected the European dominance and intervention in Latin America for long 2 centuries, and they considered Latin American countries as satellites, as they called bananas republics, banana republics. In the 20th century. They invaded them, they changed the regimes there, they took the whole economic advantages for themselves. They tried to dominate these countries till very recent history, almost in the beginning of this millennium. We saw a new wave of change, political change in Latin America. They went to the left policies with, of course, they started in the middle of the 20th century with Jacob Arbenz in Guatemala, 1954, and of course the Cuban Revolution, 1958. And this was a great point of change in Latin America. And then we find this in the beginning of this century, we found some great leaders or some great political change in Latin America with the election of Hugo Chavez Frias in Venezuela, which followed by the election of Lula da Silva in Brazil, Kirchner in Argentina, and so on.
Yeah, so a significant history of commercial exchanges as well as similarities. Yes. Professor Mahan, how can we capitalize on that sense of similarities?
I think the success of the summit basically proves the assumption that globalization is slowing down for the benefit of regional trade blocs. I think, well, so far South America has 2 regional trade blocs, Andrea and Mercosur, and also in the Arab world we're trying to achieve the unified Arab market. The fact here is that socialism was the main economic or political economy factor that is playing really in South America. It's the same thing that was here in the Arab world and slowly changing into the capitalism. And as Mr. Nigm said, that basically they have a lot of pressure on their side from the Americans, basically fighting that kind of ideology. The regional trade bloc basically reduces the dependence of the North on the South, or mainly the developed countries over developing countries. And we do have a lot of resources in the Arab world, probably more than 40% of the natural resources. And they in South America, they managed to get into the industrialized phase. Exactly. So we can learn a lot from them, particularly on the small businesses, the reform of the economy, the reform of the administrative system in the country. But mainly here, what we find that the change from globalization to regional trade bloc and the cooperation among the regional trade blocs basically is a strong phase that we're living in at this point in time. And basically these countries have suffered exactly what we suffer from: major trade deficit, negative balance of payment, high unemployment rate, brain drain, poverty rate increasing, the shortage of the hard currency. So the similarities here on the historic side, as Mr. Nigm said, and the economic progress side, I think will make a great deal of cooperation. We've seen earlier the summit of the Arab Indian. Before that, we've seen with the Chinese, the Eastern European. So I think now the Arabs started to see the benefit of dealing with economic blocs that are very similar to them. But I think before we actually get into a solid agreement or solid partnership with regional trade blocs, what we need to do basically is look at building our in-house. So we need to establish first the unified Arab market, starting with a unified or parallel currency. And we already proposed that to President Sisi, to the fact that we can have a parallel currency on top of the current currency. So when we trade with Saudi Arabia or with Emirates, instead of changing dollars, we can actually use the parallel currency, let's call it, the Arab dinar or whatever. So that would reduce the dependency quite a lot on the US dollars, and basically with time it will have a value, and the Arabs can change their reserve from the US dollars or euros into the parallel currency. So definitely it is a successful summit, and hoping that we'll see more happening, particularly on economic development, but especially that in the Arab world we really need the experience, particularly in Brazil and followed by Argentina. So definitely it is a great step in the right direction.
Great. So we'll be talking more economically, Dr. Mehanna, but Mr. Negm, let us talk about the political gains from this summit. We find that mainly issues from the Middle East, finding solutions to regional issues, namely Palestine, Syria, Yemen, Libya, and more, is considered to be the focal point political-wise.
Yes.
Seeing eye to eye on those important regional questions.
We have also a lot of similarities between the two sides. Historically, also Latin American countries stood by the Arab rights, and especially the Palestinian cause in the Middle East. Of course, the Cuban Revolution and the Cuban state. Other Latin Americans like Venezuela, Brazil, took a very advanced positions with the Palestinian cause. I remember that Hugo Chavez Frias, the ex-president of Venezuela, was the first and the only president in the whole world to cut relations, to severe relations with Israel 2 times, in 2006 during the war against Lebanon, and in 2008, 2009 during the aggression on Gaza. He was the first and only president to do so. So we have to take advantage of these positions, advanced positions, this solidarity with Arab countries. Also, they expressed a lot of solidarity for the situation in Iraq and Syria. Iraq during the invasion, American invasion in 2003, and in Syria recently, they stood by the Syrian people and Syria as a whole against the aggressions from these rebels or Daesh, and actually the Latin Americans were the seekers of unity, of relationships with the Arab world. They started and they talk about the good relations with the Arab world. They started also, I believe, in 2001 exactly, when Chavez Frias also held I think the second summit of the OPEC countries in Venezuela. He invited all Arab producers of oil to Venezuela to try to elevate the prices of the petrol during that time. During that time, the petrol price was like $9, was very low, and after this it reached even like $100, $150 in some cases in the last decade. So they did a lot, and Brazil also was a leader in trying to find out bridges with the Arab world. Of course, we have a lot of also common interests. These countries in Latin America are well advanced technically, militarily, economically. Both Brazil, I think, is the 11th economy in the world right now. Mexico is the 15th, and Argentina is the 20th. So they are all, these 3 countries are among the G20, which will be held these days. So they have great economies. They did a lot, they advanced a lot. Also, we have common experiences like economic collapses. In Mexico, in Argentina, they show a lot of economic deterioration, economic collapse in the last decades or 15 years, and they recuperated from this drama. Argentina did a lot. Argentina was I think, the almost debted country in the whole world, and they could revitalize their economy, and they now among the, as I said, 15th or 20th economy in the world. So we have to listen and to to study these cases, study these experiences, because it would help us. Our economy now is not in a very good shape, so we need to learn from them, their experiences, how they did it. They are very advanced also technologically. Brazil is very well advanced in biofuels, and also they have biodiversity, great biodiversity. They have a lot of water resources. They have forests. They have very fertile lands. We can do a lot with them. We can learn from them. We can import and export, of course. In some cases, we have similarities in the products, like the oil in the Gulf area, and also in Latin America, like Venezuela, also one of the important producers of oil in the whole world. So I believe we can benefit from them. They also can benefit from us. Open markets. I believe the cooperation between third world countries and developing countries are very important in this moment. We see integration in Latin America. We see integration in the Far East between Asian countries. We have also some challenges like the American intervention and in Latin America. They suffered a lot from American intervention, coup d'etat, and everywhere in Latin America, República Dominicana, Guatemala, Salvador, Nicaragua, and other places. Also, we suffered here. We have Israel here as a great challenge. In some cases, there's a little bit similarity. Colombia is a great ally of the United States in Latin America. So we have to coordinate our policies. We also, the majority of Arab countries and the majority of Latin American countries are members of the G15 and G77. Which are forums for the developing countries about trade, about economic interests, to dialogue and to negotiate with the advanced economies in the world.
Right. Being members, Dr. Mahanna, of the G15 and the G77, how can this reflect that it would turn out into a win-win situation? How can we count on that?
Yeah, definitely, first of all, exchanging experiences, because these countries have really, as Mr. Negm said, they already are ahead of us when it comes to economic development. They've succeeded. We're still struggling, from the Arab Spring, and we still have a few years to go, probably, in most of the Arab countries.
And they have experiences also in facing economic hurdles, but at the same time, where are they today?
Exactly. So jumping from poor countries, particularly Brazil, talking about drugs and all sorts of criminal activities, into top 20, I think it's a great experience that we can learn from. And when we look at our situation, we do really need exchanging information and exchanging experiences when it comes to economic reform, administrative reform, reforming our policies even on the international side when it comes to international trade. At this point in time, we really jumped into the World Trade Organization trade, and we traded with a lot of people, removing all barriers such as tariffs, and the result of that, we have basically large amounts of money in hard currency as trade deficit. Egypt stands at this point in time close to $50 billion trade deficit. They managed to basically reduce that quite a lot by trading with each other. And this is what we need to focus on in the next few years, is trade with countries that are similar to us in economic development and in the level of liquidity in terms of the availability of hard currency. But as we said, mainly the administrative reform that we can learn from the countries members of the G15 or the G77. Number two, exchanging experiences, and they can help us quite a lot in that particular area. And we already started with China, Russia, and Brazil on its way, waiting for President Sisi to basically visit them and finalize that. So we can learn quite a lot from them. Unfortunately, the implementation of such experiences becomes very difficult in the situations we're having at this point, but definitely Egypt is progressing in the right direction, and hopefully we will get over that in the next 2 to 3 years.
Right. Mr. Negm, well, terrorism was also on the agenda, coordinating and a sense of partnership in how to deal with this phenomenon, and also nuclear weapons was mentioned.
Yes. Here in the Middle East, we have this specific challenge, war against terrorism. Of course, war against terrorism is related to the social situation in both regions. In the Middle East, we have seen also a lot of marginalization, a lot of unemployment, a lot of fanatism, all these kind of problems. In Latin America also we can see the more or less marginalization, discrimination against the original people in Latin America, the Africans from African origins. So we have more or less similarities. As we said that they started to go to social policies in the beginning of this century. We have seen also the Arab Spring here. So we have a lot of points to discuss. Their social experiences was very, very interesting experiences. Like in Brazil, they had a lot of marginalization, a lot of difficult situation of marginalization in the economy and the political rights. They also suffered from dictatorship in the last century and so on. So if we can discuss this situation, I believe the problem here is the lack of political will in our part, because these countries have requested this for a long time, cooperation with Arab world. They know the potentials of the Arab world. They know that they can gain a lot of cooperation with our region, but till very recently there was no political will in the Arab world to deal with them. Even now we can see that they are calling for meetings and for mechanisms to fix the petrol prices in the world, because it's very low right now. But we have seen some resistance from Arab countries to do so. They have good relations with China, with Russia, and now we are starting to do the same here, because we discovered what they discovered maybe some time ago, that we have to diversify our relations with big powers, yes, in the world. They have a very good experience also in unity there. They created first the Mercosur as an economic forum and economic community, and then now they went for the UNASUR. And this UNASUR has a lot of mechanism, military and defense mechanism, economic mechanism, media mechanism. They have like Bancosur, it's a developing bank for development in Latin America. They have Telesur, a common media station for informing the whole Latin Americans about their situation, about their legacy, about their culture. They are trying to form a unity between them. They also had other University of the South there. They created also a university where they can study together. The young people from all Latin Americans can study. So they have a lot of very, very good and important mechanism and experiences that we should, I believe, follow the steps. How also to resolve their internal problems. They had very severe internal problems between, for example, Venezuela and Colombia, between Argentina and Brazil, between Latin American countries. They had a lot of conflicts, but they managed to dialogue. They managed with the mechanism to resolve their problems peacefully. So I believe the future is very promising in these aspects. Cooperation also would be very useful for both sides.
Right. A sense of cooperation, Professor Mahannan, as we can see from what Mr. Nim had just said, is that they not only used conventional means, but they also used the soft power. They used channels and that would like bridge any sort of gaps, resorting to education, is very important, and also addressing the other in a sense of understanding. So they were lending a hand of help since years for the Arab region. How can we make use of that? How can we make use of their experiences?
The main elements, they depend on really like the neighborhood. They're very close to each other. That's the first element. The second element is the language. Despite although Brazil speaks Portuguese, but Spanish is a common language. So that's basically the distance, close proximity, plus the cultural similarities. In addition to that, the suffering or the challenges they faced over the past 3 or 4 decades. On top of that, if we actually move that experience to the case study into the Arab world, we have the same close proximity, the distance, we have the cultural similarities, we have the religion similarities, we have the language. On top of that, we've got similar natural resources that we all as Arabs dominate. We basically have the entry and exit of the entire world, looking at Gibraltar on the west, Suez Canal, the Dead Sea, the Arabian Sea, and Aden passage. So we're looking at a region that really enjoys 10 times what the South America or Latin America really enjoys. But as Mr. Nigmi said, basically it's the political will. And if we actually can achieve that, and we're hoping that President Sisi's movements to try to create that definitely will work. We've seen in January 2015 for the first time the establishment of the the tariff agreement, hoping that will establish basically the Arab joint markets in 2020. And the Arab joint market, basically based on the studies, it will never exceed 4 years, and it will become at least 3 times larger than Europe because of the large resources that the Arabs enjoy. Definitely, as soon as we have that trade bloc, we will have a lot of domination when it comes to the movements of capital, the trade. We've got both basically in that region more than 25% of the trade routes that basically go through the world. We are the center of the world. So the problem that we have is the political will. And here again, because of the resources that we enjoy, the major powers will never relieve the Arab to basically get united. So it is really a great challenge. If you look at the South America, it was probably challenged by United States mainly. But in the Arab world, we've got challenges coming from United Kingdom, from United States. Russia's trying to get into the warm waters, which is going to make it quite difficult at the moment. China's trying to get in. So I think the competitiveness that is happening in the Middle East is making it very difficult for the Arabs to unite, because they've been really scattered all over the place. But again, with the political will slowly moving,
and with the sense of awareness of the
with
huge
the danger,
challenges
exactly,
that are
and the
there
danger,
ahead.
definitely, and the danger will basically help them to unite.
Right. Well, on the sidelines of attending the summit, the president and the Saudi king met in a long meeting, and they both agreed to establish the coordination council, which is mainly tasked to implement the Cairo Declaration. We'll be talking about the main items on the agenda of the declaration, the mechanism of coordinating together both countries and moving forward to this report, and we'll be back.
Saudi Arabia and Egypt agreed to establish a coordination council tasked to implement the Cairo Declaration, which outlines facets of cooperation between the two states. The announcement followed bilateral talks between Saudi King Salman ibn Abdulaziz and President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi on the sidelines of the 4th summit of the Arab South American countries, which ended on Tuesday in Riyadh. The two heads of state discussed a number of issues on the summit's agenda, in addition to efforts to promote common coordination between Arab and South American countries, according to official news. Following that, minutes to establish a Saudi-Egyptian Coordination Council were signed by the Saudi Minister of Foreign Affairs Adel al-Jubeir and his counterpart Sameh Shukri. The council will work on the implementation of the Cairo Declaration, announced earlier in July, and its attached executive annex. The Cairo Declaration includes the following components: 1. To develop of the military cooperation and working towards establishing the Joint Arab Force. enhancing the joint cooperation and investment between the two countries in the fields of energy, electricity, and transportation, achieving economic integration between the two countries and working on making them a key focus of the world trade movement, intensifying mutual investments between Egypt and Saudi Arabia, aiming to increase joint projects in both countries. 5. Strengthening cooperation in the fields of politics, culture, and media in order to jointly counter the dangers of the current regional destabilization. 6. Dividing the maritime borders between the two countries.
So the Cairo Declaration, a very important declaration actually that has more than one important point. It starts with the development of the military cooperation and working towards establishing a joint Arab force. And this has been a call by the President, Mr. Ney. The joint Arab force, how far is it important? It's very important, meantime, bearing in mind the hurdles and the challenges that the region is facing.
Yes, of course. Once again, we are in front of some lack of political will from some countries around us. The President called for this force. Of course, it's very important to fight terrorism, to fight trafficking, to fight external intervention, like what we saw in Yemen and other parts. But so far, the situation of this force in the Arab League is not advancing because, as I said, lack of political will from some countries, which they said that they need more time to discuss the idea, and this kind of things and ideas will take a long time to be realized on the ground. They need a lot of consensus, they need a lot of details, they need
but still the hurdles, the challenges augment at the same time, I mean.
Yes, of course, and at the same time you have to fight these challenges everywhere, terrorism, interventions and so on. American and Western intervention, we have seen also some regional intervention from Iran, so we have a lot of challenges around us. I believe at the end the Arabs would realize that there is no exit from their problems unless they cooperate together, yes, and they unite together. So we hope that this kind of forums with Latin Americans would push the Arabs to study other experiences, to see other experiences, and to take lessons from other lessons. No one country can do a lot alone in the whole world. We see integration everywhere, in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa, in Europe, everywhere. So the Arabs should listen to the voice of the time, and of course to work a lot and to work very rapidly to form their joint force, to make some reforms in their economies, to make reforms in their social policies, because it's the time is running and the situation is explosive, and I believe at the end we should unite together. I would also like to stress some points in this context. I believe, for example, we have to make an integration. We have in the Arab world we have Suez Canal. In Latin America we have the Panama Canal. Right. We should work together to get benefits from this. We cannot compete with each other, to not be in anybody's advantage to do so. We have also some experiences to build on. We had some kind of nuclear cooperation with Argentina, for example. Yeah. We had some small nuclear reactor for research with cooperation with Argentina. So now we are opening our economy to build another nuclear station or plant in Egypt, in the northern coast. So we need to work on this and other fields to gain experiences from each other. I believe internal integration between Arab countries, like what we just saw, and cooperation with other regions in the world would help a lot our economies, would help a lot our tourism, would help a lot our industry, every aspect almost in our life.
Right, definitely. Well, the second point in the declaration, Professor Mahanna, came concerning investment and further bolstering economic cooperation. More than one field was mentioned: energy, electricity, and also transportation.
Yeah.
So,
definitely
the investment part of the story.
Yeah. Well, still, the first world enjoys about 85% of the world investment stock going into Western Europe and United States, and they basically are able to market their fields for international investments because of security, because of interest rates, because of the technology advancements, because of resources availability, and we still falling behind when it comes to international investments. At this point in time, talking about Egypt, for example, we about $4.1 billion. That's all we have at this point. The Arabs enjoy about 2% of the world investment stock, so we're quite low on that. They do have a lot of experience in Latin America attracting foreign direct investment from the NAFTA or the North America free trade agreement, basically in areas like agricultural and consuming products. This is what we need to look at in this particular time. What is it that we need when it comes to investment? We cannot really attract foreign direct investment when it comes to consuming products. As you said, what we need is energy, because to be able to develop an economic profile that's strong for the next 50 to 100 years, we need energy. President Sisi started now with the nuclear station, with the cooperation with China and Russia. We're definitely going to use help us basically the experience of Brazil and Argentina, as well as Mexico. So for the meantime, it helps us to exchange goods and services between the two regions, and we can follow the same example that started between Egypt and Russia in a local currency to reduce the dependency on the dollar. So the most important thing here when it comes to the exchange, whether in goods and services or even information, is to look at investing or exchanging in local currencies, because it does help a lot in reducing the dependency on the hard currency or the dollar. We'll see in the next few years, probably as Mr. Ashraf Al-Arabi basically announced, that we'll have a power station that will be finalized in the next 2 to 2.5 years, and it basically boosts the energy sector in Egypt by about 40%. So definitely that's going to be a great sign to basically encourage foreign direct investment that comes to Egypt. And we're looking at 22 mega projects like the Suez Canal, so definitely we need a lot of energy, and on top of that I think we need a lot of experience, or exchanging experience when it comes to scientific research and basically cooperation when it comes to reforming the economic sector, because they already have experience on public sector that we already have deteriorating, as well as the small medium enterprises.
Right. Mr. Nigm, well, in the declaration, in the Cairo declaration, a trio was mentioned, 3 important components if we need further cooperation and a sense of understanding, namely politics and the media and culture at the same time. So there is also a sense of resort to the soft power, as we can call it, in addressing any sense of regional destabilization or trying to further foster understanding of the other.
Of course. In the Arab world, we also speak one language. The most of the Arab countries, or the Arab people, we have also geographical integration, more or less, in the same region. So I don't see any reason for not integrating our forces together in the Arab world. We need each other. We have rich countries and poor countries. We have producing countries. We have countries that enjoy labor power, like Egypt, cheap raw materials. We have every detail and every ingredient for economic development. With the Latin Americans also countries, we can do the same. They produce things that we don't, and vice versa. I believe we can also reaching an accord about main problems like oil prices, like trade with big powers in the world, social inclusion, political causes like the Palestinian cause, like the situation in Syria, Iraq, Libya, and so on. There is no problem. I believe we have to go south, to look toward the south, south countries, to develop our experiences, to develop our knowledge, because they have also a lot of knowledge. As we said, we can find big markets for our exportations. We have a lot of limitations in trade with advanced countries in Europe, United States, and so on. The regulations there are not very severe like in Europe and United States. So we can take many benefits from these countries. What's very important also is the technological aspects of these countries. They have similar experiences. They started from almost zero in developing their technologies, developing their industries, developing also capacities and scientists and so on. Also they had the same problems like or the challenges like inclusion of social classes and facing more or less unemployment as well. Debts, of course, is a big challenge for both regions. I believe we have a lot in the future to do so. What's important is to keep this mechanism, to keep this rhythm of discussion and dialogues, and to discover each other's point of power, economic power, cultural relations, points of strength, exactly, to try to diversify our relations with the world as a whole.
Right. Capitalizing on the points of strength, Professor Mehanna, in the declaration came also defining the maritime borders, and I guess this is also a very important aspect that was mentioned. While opening further horizons for investments, as Mr. Nick was saying, he mentioned the Suez Canal with Egypt and Panama Canal. What other sorts of examples of coordination? We do have huge projects here in Egypt that needs lots of investments reflected.
We've got lines, basically. We're looking at the Golden Triangle that is west of Al Qusayr in Kenya, moving south to Aswan. That's a huge triangle that is full of mineral resources. We're looking also on the South Valley, the agricultural resources, and they do have quite a lot of resources or agricultural resources that we don't have. Basically, we can, with Latin America particularly, work on something called the comparative benefits, where they have basically they plant things that we don't have, and we can exchange that. And instead of we planting rice and they plant rice, we can basically depend on each other. We can focus on wheat, for example, or other things, and they can focus on rice. So they do have more water resources than the Arab world, because we are in a desert. Their land is more fertile. I think when it comes to labor, we do have a lot of labor that can basically be exported in some countries. Despite Brazil, they do have quite a lot when it comes to labor resources. But I think in technology, that's the main thing that we really need at this point, and the economic development when it comes to small business management, and how we learn from that. And we need a lot of training in that particular area. And I think Brazil particularly can help us in the training in that area. area. On top of that, we do have natural resources. In addition, as I said in the beginning, the mineral resources. We do have the oil, we do have the natural gas, and we have the largest stock in the world when it comes to natural gas. And slowly, when oil basically finishes, the world will be moving to natural gas. So they will need us quite a lot. So we can start slowly building industrial zones that can really start with a joint venture basically between Latin companies and the Arab countries, and basically exchange the goods and services as we both need them. The main thing is reduce the dependence of the North or developed countries on the South or developing countries for the benefit of reducing the trade deficit, reducing the poverty rate, reducing the negative balance of payment. The main thing here is to cooperate and work on the negative aspects that really lie on each economy of the Arab world as well as the Latin American world, and exchange whatever we can actually help us each others with. I think the currencies are quite similar in levels despite Kuwait, but I think here again there can be some sort of an agreement to exchange goods and services in some sort of parallel currency that can be used and reduce the dependency on the dollar, and therefore will basically reduce their deficit when it comes to foreign exchange.
Right. Mr. Nim, how about the freedom of movement with such countries? For instance, earlier today in his speech, Egypt's top diplomat Sameh Shoukry, before the EU-Africa summit in Malta, he was talking about easing visa procedures and was talking about the freedom of movement. And if we apply this also on the sense of relations with Latin America.
Yes, we can also benefit a lot from this point, because Latin American countries are based on immigration. They immigrated to these new lands in the last few centuries. So they accepted a lot of immigration. This is a very good point, because we always forget about that we have a huge Arab minority in Latin American countries. We have millions and millions of Arabs in these countries. We have like maybe 6.
We need to invest in them.
Yes, yeah. We have like 6 or to 10, and sometimes they say 12 millions of Lebanese and Arabs in Brazil alone. The Lebanese in Brazil are more than the Lebanese in Lebanon, in the same in Lebanon itself. So we have a lot in Mexico. So let's not forget that the second richest person in the world living in Mexico, and Mr. Salim, he is from also Lebanese origins. So we have big minorities, Arab minorities in these countries. We don't use them, we don't get benefit from them. They are ready to trade with us. I met a lot of them, many of them in Latin America. They are ready to trade with Egypt. They are ready also to make some industries here, to invest some money here, but of course they face routine problems and of course more or less corruption in the same time. So they are a huge power. We can use them. This is a very also soft power. In Latin America, we can
investing in people,
investing in people,
easing procedures so that the link could be there.
Fertilizing the cultural relations. They almost lost they lose their language, they lose their origins, they lose their faith. We have to maybe protect them, attract them to our. They can come to study here. Many of them want to come to Egypt, for example, to study. We can create a mechanism for them, for education for them here. We can mechanism for tourism. They want to see Egypt.
Many for media cooperation as well.
Of course.
Definitely.
Yes, many of them spend 40, 50 years without going back to their home countries in Lebanon, Syria, or Palestine. So they are very attracted to Egypt as the heart of the Middle East. We can use a lot, and we can benefit. We can invest also. This is a huge continent in South America. They are maybe 4 times the area of the Arab world, double the population of the Arab world.
Yeah, we need really actually to invest in them. Unfortunately, our time is out. But we're always happy to actually see a sense of investment, not only in investments, money in the money sense of the word, but also investment in people, in culture, and in building bridges of communication. Mr. Yahya Negm, a former diplomat, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much
to the debate tonight. And I thank very much Professor Dr. Ahmed Mehanna, Professor of Political Economy. Thank you, sir, for being here.
Thank you.
And I thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. We were discussing more about the Cairo Declaration and more about basically the most important points that came in the Arab Latin America Summit that was held recently in Riyadh and was attended by President Al-Sisi. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm Tagheed Hussein. Stay tuned for the top stories coming up next.